The night before my cancer surgery, I signed my divorce papers. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. He called me a burden. But what he didn't realize is, I was about to become unstoppable. Evelyn sat motionless on the edge of her bed, the divorce papers trembling in her hands. They were so thin, so insignificant in weight, but in that moment, they felt as though they were made of lead, pulling her down into a pit of despair. Her mind spun, trying to grasp the full scope of what had just happened. How could this be real? How could the man she'd loved, the man she'd given everything to, so coldly rip their life apart, especially now, when she needed him most? You're a burden, Devon's words rang in her ears like a haunting melody. Now that you can't give me children, I'm done with you. Each syllable was like a blade, cutting deeper than the one before. The words stung, not just because of their cruelty, but because of the finality in them, the sudden, merciless conclusion to a love she thought would last forever. Her heart twisted as she looked up at him, desperately searching for any trace of the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. But there was nothing. His face, once kind and loving, now twisted in disdain, was that of a stranger. How could she have been so blind? How could she have overlooked the signs that had always been there, the coldness he had shown her in the quiet moments, the indifference that grew with every passing year? Devon, please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm having surgery tomorrow. They don't know if it's cancer yet. How can you do this now? He scoffed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, as if nothing mattered but his own comfort. That's exactly why I'm doing this now, Evie. I can't be tied to a sick wife. What about my future? My legacy? Her world spun, her breath caught in her throat. How could he be so heartless? She had given him everything, her love, her support, her very soul, and this was the thanks she got. The thought of it made her feel dizzy, like the room was closing in around her. But then something shifted. Anger, raw and unfamiliar, surged through her chest. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the divorce papers tighter, as if holding onto them would give her some semblance of control. Your legacy? She shot back, the words escaping before she could stop them. What about our vows? And sickness and in health? Remember those, Devon? Her voice cracked, but she didn't care. Devon's laugh was bitter, his eyes cold and unfeeling. Wake up, Evie. Those were just words. This is real life. His words stung more than she had expected. He was right, in a way. The vows meant nothing to him. He had used them as a convenient line, a hollow promise meant to pacify, not to honor. A knock at the door interrupted their exchange. Everything all right in there? It was Miriam, his mother. The woman who had never truly accepted her, always looked at her with cold judgment. Evelyn could feel her presence even without seeing her, hovering, waiting for this moment to unfold, ready to celebrate the end of her marriage. It's fine, Mother, Devon called out. He turned back to Evelyn, his expression unchanged. Sign the papers, Evie. Make this easy on both of us. The words hit her like a slap. Both of us? You mean easy for you, don't you? She spat, the venom in her voice catching him off guard. He shrugged, uncaring. Think about it. You've never fit in here. My parents have always seen you as less than. This is your chance for a clean break. The truth of his words stung, more than she cared to admit. Memories flooded her, Miriam's snide remarks, Stanley's cold indifference, and the way Devon had always sided with them, never once standing up for her. She had been blind to it all, but now, it was clear. All those years of sacrifice had meant nothing. Evelyn stared at the papers in her hands. Part of her wanted to tear them apart, to fight for the life she thought she had, the life she believed was worth saving. But a smaller, quieter part of her, the part that had been buried for so long, whispered that this might be the beginning of something new. A chance to reclaim herself. With a shaky hand, she picked up the pen. She signed her name on the dotted line, sealing not just the end of her marriage but the beginning of something else, something she wasn't sure of yet, but something she would fight for. She placed the signed papers on Devon's pillow, the cold finality of it sinking in. She lay down on the bed, closing her eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring more challenges, more pain, but for the first time in years, it would also bring a glimmer of freedom. I stared at the divorce papers in my hands, unable to comprehend the full weight of what they represented. My heart pounded in my chest as I traced the words, the coldness of the text contrasting sharply with the heat rising in my face. How could this be happening? How could the man I had spent the last 15 years of my life with, the man I thought I would grow old with, have reduced our entire marriage to a few pieces of paper? Devon's voice echoed in my mind, his words searing into my soul. "You've always been a burden," he had said, his tone cold and unfeeling. The words reverberated through my thoughts, each syllable like a dagger stabbing deep into the core of my being. "Now that you can't give me children, I'm done with you." The finality in his voice was suffocating. How could he so easily dismiss everything we had built together? I looked up at him, desperately searching for a glimpse of the man I had once known. The man who had held my hand in moments of joy and whispered sweet promises of a future together. But all I saw now was a stranger, a man whose face was twisted with disdain, his eyes cold and unfeeling. There was no trace of the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Devon, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm having surgery tomorrow. They don't know if it's cancer yet. How can you do this now?" His response was swift and dismissive, his voice dripping with contempt. "That's exactly why I'm doing this now, Evie. I can't be tied to a sick wife. What about my future, my legacy?" His words struck me like a slap, as if everything we had shared meant nothing in the face of his own desires. The room seemed to spin around me as I tried to steady myself, gripping the edge of the bed. "Your legacy?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What about our vows, in sickness and in health? Remember those, Devon?" He laughed bitterly, the sound like a slap in my face. "Wake up, Evie. Those were just words. This is real life." The weight of his words crashed down on me. The vows we had made to each other were nothing more than empty promises in his eyes, a meaningless tradition. All these years, I had clung to the belief that our love was strong enough to withstand anything, but now, I realized how naive I had been. The life I had worked so hard to build with him was nothing but a lie. Just as the pain of the moment began to settle in, a knock at the door interrupted our exchange. "Everything all right in there?" It was Miriam, Devon's mother. Of course, she was hovering just outside, likely waiting for the moment she could finally rid herself of me once and for all. The thought of her cold, judgmental gaze sent a shiver down my spine. "It's fine, Mother," Devon called out, his tone dismissive as he turned back to me. "Sign the papers, Evie. Make this easy on both of us." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Both of us?" I shot back, the words tinged with bitterness. "You mean easy for you, don't you?" He shrugged, not even bothering to deny it. "Think about it. You've never fit in here. My parents have always seen you as less than. This is your chance for a clean break." The truth of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always known there was tension between me and his family, but I had convinced myself it was something I could overcome. Miriam's constant criticisms, Stanley's dismissive grunts, Devon's reluctance to stand up for me, they all flooded back in that moment. I had endured it all, thinking that if I just tried harder, they would accept me. But now, I saw it clearly for the first time, I had been trying to fit into a family that would never truly accept me. "I need time to think," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I needed to process everything that had just happened. I needed to figure out what to do next. Devon's eyes narrowed, his impatience growing. "You have until morning," he said. "I want those papers signed before you leave for the hospital." With that, he turned on his heel and left the room, leaving me alone with the papers and the overwhelming weight of the decision I had to make. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the papers in my hands, but seeing nothing at all. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the silence of the room. It was my mother, Henrietta. "Evie, sweetheart, are you there?" Her voice, filled with concern, cut through the fog in my mind. I cleared my throat, trying to steady myself. "Hi, Mom." "Oh, honey, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" The dam broke, and the tears I had been holding back came pouring out. I told her everything, about the papers, about Devon's cruel words, about the surgery that loomed over me like a dark cloud. She listened patiently, her anger growing with each word I spoke. "You've been nothing but a maid to them," she said, her voice laced with fury. I knew that boy was no good, but this is beyond the pale. "Mom, I don't know what to do," I admitted, feeling lost and hopeless. "You listen to me, Evelyn Harper," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "You are strong, you are brave, and you do not need that sorry excuse for a man or his horrible parents. Your father and I are on our way. We'll be there first thing in the morning to take you to the hospital." Her words were like a lifeline, pulling me back from the brink of despair. A small spark of warmth flickered in my chest as I realized that, despite everything, I wasn't truly alone. I had my parents. I had their love and support. "Thanks, Mom," I whispered, a sense of relief washing over me. After we hung up, I turned my gaze back to the divorce papers. A part of me wanted to rip them to shreds, to fight for the life I thought I had, but another part of me, the part one had ignored for so long, whispered that maybe this was an opportunity. Maybe this was a chance to reclaim my life, to stop being a passive participant in my own story. With shaking hands, I reached for the pen. As I signed my name, I made a silent vow: I would get through this surgery. I would survive, and I would build a life so beautiful, so full of love and joy, that Devon and his family would regret ever letting me go. I placed the signed papers on Devon's pillow and lay down, closing my eyes. Tomorrow would bring challenges, pain, and uncertainty, but for the first time in years, it would also bring the promise of freedom. Evelyn sat in the sterile pre-op room, the harsh fluorescent lights casting a cold, clinical glow over everything. She had been pacing back and forth for what felt like hours, but the clock on the wall seemed to mock her. It was just a few hours before her surgery, the surgery that would determine her fate. The cancer diagnosis hung over her like a dark cloud, but it wasn't the looming procedure that had her stomach in knots. It was the divorce papers sitting on her nightstand, the papers that Devon had handed her the night before. The man she had loved, the man she had spent years building a life with, had left her, not only physically, but emotionally. His words, cold and callous, still echoed in her mind. "You've always been a burden," he had said. "Now that you can't give me children, I'm done with you." The memory of his face, twisted with disdain, was burned into her mind. She had tried to hold on to the man he once was, but all she had now was a stranger who had tossed their years together aside without a second thought. It was hard to focus. The surgery. The betrayal. Everything felt jumbled in her head. How could he do this to her now, at a time when she needed him the most? How could she face a cancer diagnosis, the fear of what might come next, while simultaneously grappling with the cold rejection from the one person she had trusted the most? She could feel her chest tighten with panic at the thought. Every breath felt shallow, every moment stretching longer than the last. She had spent years trying to fit into a family that never accepted her, trying to be the perfect wife for a man who, in the end, didn't even value her. The words he had spoken to her about legacy and his future echoed painfully in her ears. What had it all been for? Why had she tried so hard to please him, to please them, when all it had led to was this, loneliness, betrayal, and a life turned upside down? Her mother, Henrietta, had called her just before she entered the hospital, her voice full of warmth and concern. "You don't need him, Evie," she had said firmly. "You are stronger than this." Henrietta's words had a weight to them, a grounding force that Evelyn desperately needed. Her mother's unwavering belief in her made her pause and reconsider. Maybe it wasn't just about surviving the surgery. Maybe it was about surviving this moment of emotional devastation, and coming out the other side stronger. She wiped a tear from her cheek, forcing herself to breathe deeply, to steady the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to overtake her. There was no going back. There was no undoing the last few hours, no erasing the sting of Devon's words. But there was something she could do. She could fight. She could fight for herself, for her future, for the life she had always wanted but had been too afraid to claim. The cancer might take her body, but it wouldn't take her spirit. She wouldn't let it. "Excuse me, Ms. Harper," the nurse's voice broke through her thoughts, her tone gentle. "Are you ready?" Evelyn looked up, her heart racing as the reality of what was happening hit her once again. This was it. The moment that would change everything. Her stomach turned, but she nodded, standing up from the cold chair. As the nurse guided her down the sterile hallway to the operating room, Evelyn's mind raced. She was scared. Terrified, even. But in the deepest part of her soul, there was a flicker of something else, strength. It was as if the pain of the last few hours had stirred something within her, something that had been buried beneath years of doubt and fear. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it head-on. The cold operating table loomed ahead, the bright lights above her casting harsh shadows. As they prepped her for the procedure, Evelyn closed her eyes, trying to block out the sterile environment around her. She could hear the machines beeping, the whispers of the medical staff as they moved around her, but it was the steady rhythm of her own breath that filled her ears. In, out. In, out. It was the only thing she could focus on. Then, the anesthesia began to take effect. The soft fog of sleep descended, and as her mind drifted, she thought of her mother's voice, her father's reassuring words, and the vow she had silently made to herself: no matter what happened, no matter how painful this journey would be, she would find a way to rebuild. She would survive this. She would come out stronger. When Evelyn awoke, the world was blurry, and she could hear the faint sounds of hospital machines beeping around her. Her body ached, the remnants of the surgery pulling at her consciousness. But as her eyes slowly opened, the first thing she saw was the familiar face of her mother, Henrietta, sitting at her side. Her presence was a comforting weight in the room, a symbol of the love and support that had never wavered, no matter what had happened with Devon. "Evie," her mother whispered softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You're awake. It's over. They got it all. No cancer." Evelyn blinked, her mind struggling to process the words. No cancer. The relief that flooded her was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by the heaviness in her chest. The battle she had faced physically was over, but the emotional war was just beginning. She had survived the surgery, but the hardest part was still to come. Her mother continued to speak, her voice full of pride and tenderness. "You've been through so much, but you're stronger than you realize. You don't need him, Evie. You never did." Evelyn closed her eyes, the tears threatening to spill over, but she held them back. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. The emotional scars of betrayal, the pain of losing Devon, would take time to heal. But for the first time in years, she felt something stir within her, a sense of possibility. There was a life waiting for her beyond this pain. A life where she was in control, where she could build something new. She could still love, still find joy, and above all, find peace within herself. As she lay there in the hospital bed, her body sore from the surgery, her heart swelled with something unexpected: hope. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she was ready to face it. She was ready to start over. She was ready to reclaim her life, piece by piece. The night of the company mixer felt like an odd collision of two worlds. The clinking of glasses, the hum of voices, the murmur of professional pleasantries, it all blurred into a dull backdrop as Evelyn walked through the venue, her heels tapping sharply against the polished floors. She had never been one for these kinds of gatherings. They were always just another reminder of the world that had never quite accepted her. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was here not only as a woman who had recently survived a painful betrayal but also as a woman on the verge of reclaiming her life, her independence, and her worth. As she walked deeper into the room, she could feel the tightness in her chest. The walls of the venue felt like they were closing in, not just because of the overwhelming sense of social anxiety, but because of the person she knew was bound to cross her path. Devon. Her ex-husband. The one man who had once been her world, and who had now torn it apart with a handful of cold words and signed divorce papers. The memories of his betrayal rushed back in waves, but Evelyn swallowed them down. She was no longer the broken woman he had left behind. When she spotted him across the room, standing with a group of colleagues, her heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen her yet, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter because she wasn't the same woman who had once felt invisible in his eyes. She had spent days, weeks, months digging herself out of the emotional rubble of her marriage. And now, she was standing in this room, fully aware of her worth, fully aware of the strength she had found in herself. But Devon had never been one to leave things unresolved. His eyes caught hers across the room, and for a split second, she saw it, the brief flicker of recognition. Then it was gone. He excused himself from his colleagues and walked toward her, his steps slow, hesitant. He was wearing that same smug expression she remembered so well, the one that made her stomach churn with contempt. As he drew closer, the memories of their last fight, his cruel words, and the shock of the divorce papers resurfaced, but Evelyn forced herself to stay calm. He had no hold on her anymore. "Evie," he said, his voice softer than she remembered, but there was an edge to it that made her flinch. "I didn't expect to see you here." She took a deep breath and met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I'm here to move on, Devon."